Well, we've been looking at Give God the Year. We are giving God this year that's coming up. We're looking forward to the future. We're looking forward to what He has for us tomorrow. And last week we were looking at being dedicated and dedicating it to Him, but being dedicated to Him. So the first of the three traits we're going to look at this month, dedication and discipline. We looked at this with this genealogies of all places, a part that we oftentimes just ignore in the Bible, which follows the genealogy of Seth through Enoch to Noah. And so we're dedicating the year to Him. We're being dedicated to God. You know, nobody gets closer to God on accident. And here's the thing about it, okay? Not only do you not get closer to God on accident, but it's also a very slow drift that takes you from God. It's unintentional. It's just a slow drift of letting off. And then you wake up a couple years later and your heart has changed and you've gotten farther away from God. It's because if you're not intentional about being dedicated to God, you're going to drift. And so then you get to the place of saying, well, how did I get here? We're reading through the Bible this year. That's a way that we are dedicating the year to Him. That's a way that we are we dedicate ourselves to Him every day. And we're also not just being dedicated in that aspect. We're being dedicated to Roswell, right? We're dedicating ourselves to the service of people. How is your lifestyle affecting your kids and your grandkids? How are the things that you are doing? How is the life that you are living? How is it affecting your kids and your grandkids after you? Are you loving and serving, or are you being offended? So each moment is a blessing. You know, oftentimes, especially those of us who have illnesses and diseases that are kind of ongoing, chronic, and whatnot, we kind of lose sight of this. But each moment really is a blessing, and we can use that blessing for ourselves, or we can use it for others. Which takes us to the second trait that we're looking at for the three traits of giving God this year, and that's generosity. And this is going to come from the story of Abraham. We'll start in Genesis 13, but then we'll go into 14 and 18 and then back to 12. A couple statistics for you. According to First Republic, less than 1/4 of the American adult population lives debt-free. Less than 1/4. Wow. That's hard. I know me and Gracie put forth a very concerted effort to pay off our school loans. And we did. We're no longer in school loan debt. But we had to put all of our energy and effort into that. And we were driving a little Ford Focus 2-door, and getting ready to have 5 kids with that little thing, and it was not working out. And so we were praying for God to open a door because we said we don't want to get in debt, car debt. We can't afford car debt. It's just not a good thing for people with 5 kids. So God opened a door, and somebody bought us that big van you see us driving around. We paid for, I think it was $5,000, and the other X amount of thousands of dollars they completely paid for. And so that was something we could not have afforded. According to Ramsey, Dave Ramsey, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him, the age group with the least amount of credit card debt is actually people under the age of 29. Every other age group has over $100 billion of credit card debt. So, I mean, these are huge numbers. According to a study released by Patterson and Kim, I want to say it was the early 2000s, 1/4 of people living in debt, that's 25%, would abandon their family to be free of debt. They would abandon their family in a second just to be free of debt. And according to that same study, 23% of people living in debt would join the oldest profession, if you know what I'm saying, for a week or more to be free of debt. These are huge numbers. That's okay. If there's 4 people in a room, one of them would be willing to do that to get out of debt. So you can see from these statistics I'm throwing at you how scary financial things can be. And it's important to talk about these things when we're talking about generosity, because whenever you say generosity, people think money. And whenever people think money, they think, I can't give. So, I mean, these are normal things that everybody feels and thinks. Seneca, the Roman, and I don't know if he would be considered a philosopher or whatever, but the Roman Seneca once said, money has yet to make anyone rich. Money has yet to make anyone rich. And, here's the thing, not having money, that might make you a little unhappy, huh? But owing money makes you miserable. And that's for sure. And we live in very hard times. We're in the middle of a bit rocky situations economically, and it's not as easy to pay for things like groceries as it was a couple years ago. I think a lot of people are a little nervous with what's going on in the world. And there obviously is no easy solution. There's a lot of people who are barely making ends meet, and there's really no easy solution. I'm going to give you 3 very quick money tips, just in case you're having problems yourself. I don't want this to distract too much from the lesson, or from the message, I guess. I just, I throw it out there. The first thing is avoid new debts if you can. Any way that you can avoid a new debt, avoid it. It doesn't matter how good of a deal that thing is for. If you don't buy it, that's more money you didn't spend. Me and my wife have this ongoing joke because she'll say, "Oh, this was X amount off," and I say, "Yeah, and if you didn't buy it at all, it'd be 100% off." You see, it's a joke that we have. I'm not trying to make my wife look bad or anything. She's great with money. It's just the idea of sometimes we look and we see that's a really good deal, but if you avoid debt at all costs, a huge blessing to you. And for the younger ones, it'd be like college debt. Sometimes the older ones too, I guess. But even house debts can be a huge. This is not really the best time to be buying a house. For instance, interest rates are kind of up, and things are might be a better time to wait. The second quick thing is pay off debts that you have. Any monthly things that you have that are constantly draining your resources, like Netflix or Hulu, those kinds of things. It might not seem like a big deal, but it is. If you're buying a cell phone instead of, with payments, instead of just buying one outright, these payments are oftentimes hundreds of dollars. And if you reduce that, these little ticks that are bleeding you dry will, eventually get cut off. So pay off the debts you can. If you have school loans, Dave Ramsey teaches what's called a snowballing, where you focus on the smallest one, you keep taking those payments and moving them to the larger ones until you're all paid off. A third quick money saving tip: don't buy it if you don't need it. Don't buy it if you don't need it. We live in a culture where people buy a bunch of things they don't even need. I'll give you a couple really quick things. Eating out all the time. I mean, eating out is fine, but if you're eating out all the time, it's just a huge, huge drain. When you go to the store and you have to buy name brand all the time, and you're not shopping the deals, and my wife has all these apps on her phone where when she buys something at the store, half the time they end up paying us for buying it. And there's a lot of ways you can save money at the store. Really good ideas. Poor people, rich people don't just have a bunch of money to throw away. They watch their money. And going to college when you don't need it. I'm all for college, but some people go to college when they don't even need it. Going to Starbucks to buy a coffee every day, which is like $4-something, versus just making it at your house. Getting delivery instead of just getting up off your butt and go getting it. It's easy and fun. You get to tell somebody else to do all your shopping for you. But it's a huge drain on your resources. So yes, I'm not denying that we live in hard times, but there are some things you can do. Now, moving on to Genesis 13, it says this starting in verse 1, and we're just going to hop through the first couple of verses, and then we're going to read through later, because not a whole lot of this has to do with what I'm talking about today. So I'm not trying to cut stuff out of the Bible, just trying to focus what we're talking about. Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, which is the hill country there on the next to the coast of western Israel. He and his wife, or I should say southwestern Israel, he and his wife and all he had, he went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly been, which is getting closer to Jericho and Jerusalem in that region. So now Lot, this is down in verse 5, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together. Rich people problems, am I right? For they had so many possessions that they could not stay together, and there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. So just in case there's anyone here who's not familiar, Abram is Abraham before his name was changed. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let's not have quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, since we are relatives." See, it was starting to get to Abraham and Lot. They were starting to fight too. It started out with the herdsmen, but then it started spreading. "Isn't the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked out and saw that the entire plain of the Jordan, as far as Zoar, was well watered everywhere, like the Lord's garden and the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's an area in, if you're not familiar with geography, let me just real quick, Geography 101, okay? Israel basically has 4 sections to it. There's the westernmost part, which is like the coast. Then next to that, there's the hill country. And then next to that is like this deep chasm, this deep like crevice, I guess you could say, and the Dead Sea is in that. And then east of that is another hill country, which is great for like sheep and stuff. So what he's talking about here is where the Jordan goes down is in that deep crevice spot, that between the two hill countries. And in that area, it was very green at this time. So, moving on, in the next verse, so Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself, which would have been very green, very pleasant. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, but Lot lived in the cities on the plain and set up his tent near Sodom. So you have them kind of separating ways there. Abraham staying more to the west, and Lot going more towards the east. So the first thing we see from this story, which I think is important, and we see it throughout the stories that I'm going to look at, but the first thing is that generosity includes money. I don't have to say this, everybody knows that. When I say the word generosity, you're probably going to think of finances, something to do with money. And the biggest problem with being generous is when we make excuses for ourselves. I can't give because whatever. Maybe we all have different excuses. I can't give because I'm not rich. I can't give because I'm in too much debt. I can't give because I'm trying to pay this off. I can't give because of this. And we all have those different things. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel stupid or anything like that. We all do this because we get worried about the future. How am I going to pay for groceries? How am I going to pay for my house? How am I going to pay for if my car breaks down? And these are realistic things to be worried about. But if you wait until you can be generous, you're always going to find a reason to wait to be generous. And that it gets to be not a house of cards, but not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but a circuit where you're just doing the same thing over and over again, and it's never good enough. Like if you guys have ever, I'm sure you have, what am I saying? The Christmas movie, Christmas Carol, I think is what it was called, by Charles Dickens. Do you guys remember that? Where the main guy, Scrooge, he's afraid to spend his money, right? He's just, no. Well, then his business was successful. He was successful. He had enough money. He was partners, all this stuff. And so his woman friend wants to, tie the knot. And he says, well, business continues to be poor. And so then it goes on to where he's an older man now, and he's still afraid because he could still make the business more profitable. And that's what I'm talking about. You get kind of in this idea of always holding it off. And I think an important distinction to make is you can't give as others give, but you can give what you can give. Does that make sense? There's going to be a line where you say, I can't give because you look at this person over here and they're giving a lot of money. You think, oh man, I just never compete with how much they're giving. Hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So we say, I'm not going to give $1 because I can't give $5,000. You see the difference? And that's something that I think is robbing us of a lot of joy because we worry too much about our finances. We worry too much about the future. We worry too much about the economy. Jesus tells us an amazing story or I guess he didn't tell the story. The Gospels tell the story, but Jesus is talking to his disciples in the Gospels. And there's all these people giving money at the tabernacle, or I guess I should say the synagogue. And, they're all making a show out of it. And then there's this woman who comes up and just gives just a tiny bit of money. Just a tiny bit of money. And Jesus is watching people give. He is watching who's giving into the synagogue. Gee, you want to talk about, all eyes on you, feeling the pressure, knowing that God himself is watching you give. Ooh-wee. So here he is, here they are with Jesus watching them giving. Don't worry, I don't watch who gives. I don't do that. But I'm not Jesus, so there, huh? So Jesus is watching them give, and this woman goes up and gives just a barely anything, and then so Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "Look at that person giving. She gave more than all those other people who were giving a lot of money." And see, the secret that she had learned is that no, she did not have to give as others give. She learned that you can give what you can give. It's not a competition between you and somebody else. But that takes us to the very next thing about generosity that I think we see in this story, is that generosity isn't only money. It's good to have your finances submitted to God. It's good to worship God with your money. It's good to have control over your money and know where it's going and not to have money that just disappears from your wallet. These are good things, great things. I actually purposely don't carry cash in my wallet because that money has a habit of getting feet and walking away. If it's in the bank, it doesn't do that. This magical thing. But that's not where it all ends, okay? Generosity isn't only money. It starts with money, but it's not only money. For Abraham, in this story here, him and his nephew Lot, they're both doing great. Things are really going great for them, economically, financially, however you want to say that. But it's just getting to the point where they're both being too successful. We gotta figure something else. This is not working out for us. And so Abraham decides to, okay, you have first dibs. And I'm going to get to why that's important in just a second, okay? For Abraham, he took the loss and let Lot have the first claim. He took the loss. Okay, this is very important. Let me get to that in just a second. But just imagine this. Abraham, he's not just generous with his money. It goes beyond that for him. So let's see, why is it significant in this story that he lets Lot have the first pick? Well, let's hop over. Did I include it? Hold on. I might not have included it. Oh, no. I'm sorry, I did not include it. I was going to, and I decided at the last second to take it off. In Genesis chapter 13, this is why it's important. I don't have it up there, I'm sorry. But in Genesis chapter 13, God says this to Abraham. He says, I'm going to give you all of this land. And then we get to Genesis 14. So who has a stake on the land? Abraham or Lot? Abraham. Who was given it by God? Abraham. So here we have the very next chapter. Abraham and Lot are both doing so good. They're succeeding so much that they have to split ways. And Abraham does not say, you get out of my land. Abraham gives Lot the first pick. This is the significance of that. Abraham had the promise from God. Lot did not have the promise from God. That is significant. You could even say, Abraham could even make the point, I deserve it. I deserve it. I have the right. And yet Abraham doesn't do that. Why? Because Abraham understood generosity. Yes, it does start with money, absolutely. But it doesn't end there. Abraham was a generous person. And so even though he had the stake, he deserved it. It was his by right. He still let Lot have the first. Even though he could be missing out, he still let Lot have the first. That's generosity. So we get to chapter 14. Let's move on a little bit. Lot has settled the area. Things are going pretty well for him. He's happy enough, and Abraham is happy too, and there's no more quarreling between them. How about that? Sometimes you just have to get a little distance from the problem, huh? So then in chapter 14, verse 8, then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor, went out and lined up for battle in the Siddim Valley. Against King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goim, King Amraphel of Shinar, and King Arioch of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the Siddim Valley contained many asphalt pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, so basically, to give you, once again, to give you an idea what's going on here, these kings that are fleeing, they're Canaanite kings, from think northern-ish Israel, sort of, and the other kings that are winning, they're from more like Syria, Turkey kind of area, okay? And so the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah are fleeing back down southwards. Some fell into them, but the rest fled to the mountains. The 4 kings took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went on. Now, remember, this is the same Sodom and Gomorrah that Lot has settled in, okay? So let's move on there. They also took Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, for he was living in Sodom, and they went on. So they've won, they've conquered, they've taken their stuff, they've gone. So then you get to chapter 14, verse 14, and look what Abraham does. This tragedy has just happened. These kings have had their squabble, their war. They've taken off their spoils, and okay, that's that. And so then when Abraham hears this, Abraham heard that his relative had been taken prisoner. He assembled his 318 trained men born in his household, and they went in pursuit as far as Dan, which is northern Israel. So they went all the way here, all the way up. Now, if you notice, it wasn't called Dan at this time. It's referred to as Dan here because later on, Dan is given that territory, which they then trade out for some other territory, and the northernmost city in Israel gets called Dan. In case you cared. If you didn't care, things. So we'll just move on from there. And the point of this section is, for Abraham, he did not consider the cost. He saw the need, and he filled the need. And that really is generosity at its core, when you don't consider the cost. How can I profit from this? How can I make rich off this? Rather, how can I serve others? And you see that here with Abraham, which is a very difficult thing, because life gets in the way of generosity. Have you noticed that? I want to be generous, but the kids or the job or the ministry or something is always getting in the way of generosity. Have you noticed? It's like it's always trying to rob us of pouring into others. And the thing is, I'm going to give you a secret, okay? It is trying to rob you of pouring into others. Satan's working through it. Your flesh is working through it. Things are always going to be hard to be generous. It's always going to be hard. It doesn't change with age. Now, some people have this idea, well, if I was given $1 billion, then I'd know. If you were given $1 billion and you're living in debt, that $1 billion would be spent by the end of the year. And then you'd be in need again. The problem oftentimes usually is not more money. The problem is in management of your money. This is one of the things that people keep themselves in a rut of being poor. Not all people. But a lot of times we'll keep ourselves in a rut of being in debt and being poor because we think if I had money, then I'd be happy. Then we get money, then we spend it, and we're not happy. So we're poor because we're in debt, so then we get more money. You see what I mean? And we keep ourselves in this thing of, if I have more, if I spend more, then I'll be happy. And we live in credit card debt or other kinds of debt, and we're not happy because we're in debt. And the problem, obviously, in those situations, not in the case of everybody who's poor, but in those situations, is because we don't have any control over money. So here in Abraham, and with Abraham, we don't see Abraham just being foolish and stupid with his money. We see him being generous with his money, but also being generous with his core, with the core of who he is. And when it comes to the point of somebody being in need, he just takes it up. He doesn't consider the cost. He's just generous. He's just generous. And somewhere along the lines, we got it in our heads that being generous means it has to only be about money, and it can only be done when we have the money to give. And both of those ideas are wrong. Because what you see here with this story is that Abraham is serving, not financially giving. And that's still generosity. Well, I don't have money to give. You have a life, right? You have time. There's other things besides money. Lots of other things besides money. So let's continue on with the story in verse 18 and then 20 and then on from there. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest to God Most High. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. So here he is. He's just won this war that was not his own. Helped somebody at the drop of a dime. And then after he won and got his nephew back, he turns around and gives 1/10 of his money, not his spoils. Okay? And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything he owned. Not that he won in the battle. See the difference? He already had the stuff. The kings didn't take it from him. He took what he already had and gave 1/10 of it. It was just called the tithe nowadays. Tithe literally means 10%. And so he gives a tithe out of what he owned, not what he earned from battle. Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people, but take the possessions for yourself. Take your spoils of war." And this is Abram's response. Listen to this. This is an important factor here. Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand in an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or sandal strap or anything that belongs to you, so you can never say, 'I made Abram rich.'" There's nothing wrong with taking what is due you. When you go to your job, you work, they pay you. There's nothing wrong with that. If your boss is not paying you, they're not really your boss. You are their slave. Like that is one of the factors of money. There's nothing wrong with being paid for the job that you do. In the New Testament, for instance, it says, "Hey, the workman is worthy of their spoils. Don't muzzle an ox while it's threshing it out." It says all these things. These are good things. It's good to get paid for the job well done, right? That's not the issue here. The issue is Abraham is not putting his trust in them to make him prosper. That's the heart of it. Abraham's generosity wasn't because he was rich. Abraham's generosity was because of his trust in God. And that is the defining line between getting paid what you're due versus not trusting in man for your wealth. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people leaving a church and just huffle and buffle and swearing at the pastor on their way out. You'll never get a dime out of me. See if the church can survive without my tithe. It'll survive. Do you know how I know that? Because this is what the Bible says. Even the gates of hell will not overcome it. A building might close down, but the church will survive. It will. It'll continue through all kinds of adversity. No matter what's in America's future, the church will survive. It always will. It might shrink. It might lose its buildings. It might lose its property, but it'll still live there. It'll still continue on. I made Abraham rich. I will take nothing except what the servants have already eaten. They've already put it in their mouth. I can't take it out from them, so we can go ahead and let them have it. But as for the share of the men who came with me, these other guys, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, they can take their share. Whatever they want to do, you pay them, that's fine. But as for me, leave me out of it. So this is very important because Abram had the opportunity to exploit since he was due the money, but he did not exploit. He did not use that. There's a lot of times when we come to God or church or ministry, kind of with this attitude that, you know what, you're lucky to have me. You're lucky you have me. I may show up here and do this ministry, but let me tell you, you're lucky that I'm here. I mean, without me, there wouldn't be anybody else to do it, for whatever that's worth. So you have this person with a nasty attitude, but they're faithful to it, so you all better not upset me or I'll take off and leave, and I won't do my ministry anymore. And we don't say it quite like that. We say it in a way where we don't realize how stupid it sounds until it's already out of our mouth. You know what I mean? Well, they're not going to do a good enough job as me. If I don't do it, nobody will do it right. And then after we say it, we realize, hey, that doesn't sound overly so good. I am entitled. And Abraham really was entitled. But yet you don't see him taking it. And that's just such an amazing thing because we really do live in an entitled culture. We live in a very entitled culture. Owe me what I'm due. I remember at this one food pantry that we were doing. Now, not everybody that goes to a food pantry is like this, okay? However, we were doing this food pantry, and at the food pantry, and once again, I'm not trying to say that if you're poor, it's your own fault. I'm not trying to say that. Yeah, I know people already have their opinions about that. I'm not trying to do that, okay? I'm saying sometimes the cases, okay? And the same is true. Sometimes you run into people who are on assistance who are just lazy. And it's not always the case, but sometimes you run into that. So we were doing this food pantry, and, they were getting all kinds of free food, and they left mad because one of the things they didn't qualify for getting because their household wasn't large enough. They were getting free food stamps, free WIC. They came to the food pantry and got free money. Their rent was being paid, and it wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough. It didn't matter what everybody else was giving. It still wasn't enough. And the sad thing is when we get to that same part in the church, when it's still not enough, it doesn't matter what God gives us. We only look at the things he's taken away. It doesn't matter what future ministry there is for us. It just matters the ministry that we lost. It doesn't matter what's in our future for tomorrow, what God has in store for Roswell or for the church or for us here now. It just matters what we lost. And you get to this narrow focus, and life gets so dull and colorless because all you can see are the things that you don't have anymore. You can never be generous from a heart that is self-absorbed. It's never going to happen. You might do something generous. You might, for instance, give money, but your heart is dark, and so the giving is dark. That makes sense? But with Abraham, we don't see that. He was entitled, but he wasn't entitled. You get what I'm saying? He had reason to be entitled, but he wasn't. So then we hop down to chapter 18 and verse 17, going on from there. Oh, wait, did I already read that? No, yeah, I didn't. Then the Lord said, should I hide what I am about to do from Abraham? Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation later on, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him, which is talking about Jesus, the coming Messiah, which would come through Abraham's family. For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. So I have appointed him not just to what he's doing, but also he's going to be teaching his kids and his grandkids about God. Okay? This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense, and their sin is extremely serious. I will go down to see if what they have done justifies the cry that has come up to me. If not, I will find out. Now, obviously, God already knew, right? But sometimes God gives opportunity to reveal what he already knows. Sometimes God gives opportunity to reveal what he already knows. Do this, okay? For the next month, pray and say, Lord, show me what is hidden in my heart, the ugliness that I'm hiding from myself. Help me to be a more patient person. Help me to bless others more. Help me to be more generous. Help me to be more disciplined. And then get ready for the next year being hell on earth as God shows you again and again your failure. People are going to come by, you're going to snap at them, you're going to lose your calm every single day of the week. You're going to, all of a sudden, your finances are going to be tied up, you're going to have problems come out the wazoo, and you can say, what's happening, God? And God's going to eventually tell you this in a quiet little voice. He's going to say, it was there the whole time, you didn't see it. See, God uses these things to reveal what is already there. It's already there. We just don't know it because we lie to ourselves. We make ourselves the hero of every story. I got in this conflict, but it was their fault because they're just a nasty person. I did nothing wrong. I mean, think about your marriage, right? How many times in your marriage do you go away irritated because your spouse, they're just so immature, they just say the stupidest things, or they were just always trying to irritate me, or, whatever. And then we get to work or whatever, and we're sitting there stewing, and we think, well, I mean, I did do that, and I have been doing that, and, well, there is that. You see what I'm saying? But in our heads, we make ourselves the hero in every single story. And so here we have Abraham, and God's telling him, hey, these people, I'm going to slaughter them all. And so then Abraham steps forward and says this, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? His concern isn't God punishing those people who are sinners. That's not his concern. People who don't want God. Let's just say the atheists of his time. He's like, okay, that seems fit to you. You're the judge of all the earth. Who am I to tell you how to do your job? That makes sense to him. He doesn't try to tell God his business. This is the question that he's had. Will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are but 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away instead of sparing the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people who are in it? The people who love and serve you, the people who have surrendered to you, are you really going to destroy them as though their sacrifice to you doesn't even matter? You could not possibly do such a thing to kill the righteous with the wicked. It is beyond you. You can't possibly do this thing. Treating the righteous and the wicked alike. You could not possibly do that. Are you listening to what he's saying? It is impossible for you to do this thing. We always talk about the God of the impossible. Abraham is talking about literally something that God is incapable of doing. You could not possibly do that. Won't the judge of the whole earth do what is just? So let's ask a very basic and obvious question. What did this matter to Abraham? How was Abraham going to profit a single thing from this? He wasn't. It had nothing to do with him. He didn't live there. He didn't have his assets tied up in that area. He could have just simply went and sent somebody for Lot and drug him out of there. Like it wasn't any skin off. Was it skin off his nose? It didn't affect him. But being generous is something that remember, it includes money, but it's not only money, and it's beyond money. Okay, and that Abraham is not considering the cost. And then now we see the next thing about generosity. It's something where a need is seen and service just follows. Service just follows. It flows from that. So let's keep moving forward here, okay? We've seen a lot about Abraham. We've seen a lot about the story. Being generous does not make life easier. There's this idea, especially when a lot of times pastors talk about tithes and offering and giving. Hey, you give money to God, and then your money will be overflowing. You'll have money out the wazoo. You'll have more money than you can count. I don't really think that that's accurate. We'll look at that at the end of the month, but let me just kind of kind of reduce this longer conversation to a shorter conversation and say, you don't give and honor God because of what you'll get. You give and honor God because you give and honor God. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be easier. When you look at the story of Abraham that we've been looking at this morning, you don't see him getting it easier from his struggles. Rather, he had to let Lot have first pick and then go somewhere else. You see Lot get in trouble, and Abraham can bail him out. You see Sodom and Gomorrah getting destroyed, and Abraham being inconvenienced trying to save them. That's what you see. You don't see him having an easy time of it, and this is just the highlights. There's other things that are going wrong for him. But the moral of the story being here, being generous doesn't make your life any easier. In fact, it's normally the exact opposite. It makes it harder. But being generous is more rewarding. Being generous is more rewarding. And a lot of times, even you can even teach kids this. Instead of having it be all about presents, you take them to volunteer at a soup kitchen or something, and you see the way that it changes their view on what Christmas is about. But if you make it all about the presents and getting stuff, well, then that's all that they know. They don't understand that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And Abraham, I think he did know this, because you don't see Abraham going like this, but you do see Abraham going like this. And there's a huge difference in Abraham's outlook as compared to other people in the story. So being generous is more rewarding. It gives a greater opportunity. Gives a greater opportunity to bless people, but it also gives you a better opportunity to serve people. If you're staying in your house all day, I know COVID's scare and all that stuff. If you are scared of COVID, just remember that your life can't come to a complete stop. Okay, you're going to eventually get sick, and God doesn't want you to live your whole life confined to your house. It's going to make you feel lonely. It's going to make you feel miserable. If you feel like you need to take precautions, do that. That's fine. I'm not wanting to tell you one way or another about the vaccine. You do whatever you want. What I am going to tell you is that God doesn't want you to live your life hidden away. Life isn't worth anything if it's just held on to. Life has to mean something. It has to be given. And that COVID is something that I feel like has robbed the church of that. It's something where we've lost sight of the bigger thing. Okay? It really does need to be past that, past your fear. And so like I say, take whatever precautions you feel like you need to, even for a time or for a season. Just remember that the season has to eventually end. You have to eventually get back to serving people. The church is meant to be touching, but we can't be touching if we're all in isolation. And a lot of studies are coming out about this, the mental effects on people of COVID, isolation and suicide and depression, all these mental issues going up. And it's important to keep an eye on these things because we weren't meant to live that way. But being generous, it gives us opportunity, it's rewarding. It gives us more of a chance to serve people. But being generous also gives us a bigger chance to grow. Being generous gives us a better chance to grow. And what I mean by that is when you serve people, when you're generous with people, okay, and remember, generosity is not just money, it's giving of your time, it's giving of your resources, being generous. When you are generous and you serve people, you are getting a greater chance to grow because you're going to reach out to people, and then they're going to mistreat you for you loving them. Going back to the example that I gave earlier about the food pantry, there were so many people who'd come in every single week yelling and angry and mad for getting free stuff. Then our teams would get yelled at, they'd feel like trash, and the next week it would happen again. With different people, not the same people every time. That's how it works. When you love and serve people, they hate you for it, and then you keep on doing it when you have every reason to stop. In the future, we're going to get involved with serving the schools, for instance. We're going to come in, we're going to say, hey, we'd love to serve you. And they're going to say this, no. Get out and get away from our school. We don't want anything to do with you. Because they have a history with other churches and other religious groups that's burned them. And then we're going to say, okay. Then we're going to give it some time. We're going to pray, and we're going to go back and say, look, is there any way that we can serve you? We don't want recognition. We don't want you to give us anything. We just want to love and serve you, our community. That's it. And then eventually, it might take years, but eventually they'll say, okay. And they'll give us something small. And the whole time that we do it, they will gripe about us and complain about us and gossip about us. And then we're going to keep on doing it. And then people are going to see that we are genuinely here to love and serve Roswell. And then it's going to matter. Maybe not to the people in the school, but eventually it'll matter to somebody. And that's true generosity, when you give beyond, without weighing it, without the cost. When there was a situation that had come up a number of months ago, and some equipment had gotten loaned out, and some people were wanting us to put a date on when we'd get the equipment back, but we didn't. We never put a date on when we'd get the equipment back, and the reason why, because it was needed. And we wanted to help them until the need was no longer there. If you give people help with stipulations and asterisks, that's not really giving them help. I mean, there's always like, well, you can do this, but just for this song. And then, I remember one time in California, there were some people that my dad was the pastor at the time, and he was letting them stay at the parsonage because we had our own house. And so it was for a time, and some the boards, which means the board's wives, because the board members didn't really care, but the board's wives were trying to, kind of interfere through the board member, like sometimes people do. It happens, Nothing you can really do to prevent it. It just happens. And so they were trying to get him to give a time frame on when they had to be out by. Now, there's a time and a place for that, absolutely, but you don't kick people when they're already down. You know what I mean? And if you're really being generous, the idea about generosity is you're being generous without weighing the cost. See, nobody was using the parsonage already. It wasn't needed for anything else. The same thing that happened here. Nobody was using that equipment. If we hurried up and got it back, guess who'd be using it? Nobody. Generosity is not something that you do. I threw money at a homeless person, so now I can feel better about myself. That's not generosity. That's throwing money at a homeless person. You know what I mean? Generosity is about your core of who you are. It goes beyond financial giving. Another thing about being generous is it gives greater opportunity for pain. What do they say? No pain, no gain. By loving people and being put through the pain of serving other people, when you're not getting anything for it, you grow. So let's move on. I guess we could actually say move backwards, because now we're going to hop all the way back to chapter 12 of Genesis, which says this, and I'm just cutting off the very end. God's going through telling Abraham about what he's going to do in his future, and at the very end of that blessing, he says this: all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. See, Abraham understood a very important thing. We are given to give. I still have not learned this lesson. I still have not learned this lesson. And every time that I think that I have learned this lesson, I find out all the more how much I have not learned this lesson. Because what we do is we think this. Remember, in our heads, we're going to think this: I'm given money so I can give money. So I have enough money to give, so I'm going to go give money to this. We're talking about more than money, right? Generosity is about from who you are. What other things have we been given? Let's make a very quick list. Money, yeah. Time. Time. You've been given time. You've got time every week to work, to do your hobbies, to live your life, to spend it with family, to sleep. All these things that you have in your schedule for you. But volunteering is where you take a little bit of that time and you give it to something else. You reading the Bible, for instance. Another thing that we've been given that we can give: blessings. What blessings have you been given that you can give to others? Very talented people here in the church. Resources. But another thing that only recently has come to my attention thinking about this is we are given our health to pour into those that don't have health. See, not everybody can get out of their house, but I might be well enough to go visit them in their house. I have a lot of bad days health-wise. But for those days that I have good health and I have strength, my go-to is I need to take the day and just spend it on me since I have the time and energy. Don't you find yourself doing the same thing? But we're given to give. It'd be easier for me to come home after dealing with my disease and work, come home and just veg out on the couch. But I have kids that need me, and I have a wife that needs me, and I'm given to give. And this, once you start weighing this in your own life, you find all the areas that you haven't been giving to God. But sometimes I think we get in a part in life when we want to be known for being generous, but we don't really want to be generous. And so what we do is we say yes, but we mean no. So we'll smile on the outside, but inside we're counting it against the person. Have you ever seen somebody like this? They might even invite you, like, hey, come to my house. But the whole time, they don't really want you at their house. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then you come and they're like, oh, great, you're here. And so they'll give you, but you know that they're weighing every single penny that they give you. Have you ever seen these people in your own life? Well, Abraham, he went above and beyond, and he wasn't like that. See, we are to be generous to God, which is funny because he doesn't need it. And we're also to be generous to people, which is funny because people need more than we can give. Now, I once again want to caution you guys, be careful about just throwing money at a problem. Sometimes it just makes it worse. As you guys know, I've spent a lot of my past history dealing with drug addicts and that kind of stuff. Just throwing money around isn't the best idea. It really is not. Help oftentimes means not giving money in those kinds of situations. It's a very gray area. It's hard to walk. It's hard to, try and figure it out. But I'll move on from there. So next week we're going to look at the third and final trait, which is peacemaking. But what can we possibly take away from this week, looking at Abraham and looking at how he was generous and how can we take this away? I think there's three things that I want to mention. The first is God wants to turn our affections, our loves, from ourselves outwards. God wants to turn our affections outwards. Now, keep in mind, naturally, we're going to focus inward. We don't have to have anybody teach us how to be, self-absorbed. Those of you who have had kids, right? It doesn't take them long to figure out that the world revolves around them, right? It just comes real easy, and it doesn't matter if you're the world's best or worst parent. The kids are always going to just pick up on this. And when you're in Christ, the same kind of thing happens. When you're young in Christ, you spend your money as you see fit. It's my money, why shouldn't I? But as you get older in Christ, as you mature in your faith, you start realizing that not just your money, but everything, your resources, are meant for you to invest wisely into the kingdom. You have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of money, a limited amount of resource, a limited amount of health. How are you going to invest it? When you grow in Christ, your focus changes. The second thing that I think we can do to apply this, be generous with more than just money. If you leave from this place thinking that I just talked about money today, I will be very heartbroken because really money has almost nothing to do with it. Almost nothing. It has a little bit, but really it doesn't have much. When you're volunteering, when you're serving the community. In February, we have two big outreaches coming up in February. The first one is a widows and widowers luncheon. For people who have lost their spouse, we're just going to give them a free lunch, give them a I guess you could call it entertainment, a good time, I guess you could say, here at the church. It's just for about 2 hours. What an opportunity to serve Roswell. The second one we're having in February is called a date night. So we're going to take people's kids, have a kids event here, while the parents go out and have a date night. We get nothing from either of these. It's just a way to serve and love Roswell. That's it. We're going to have more information on this later on. But the idea here is be generous with more than just money. If it only comes down to money, I think the problem is really with your thinking. When you hear somebody say generous and you only go to money, that probably means that your preoccupation is with money, not so much the actual fact of it. Give your time, give your skills, be generous with forgiveness and mercy. There's something that we always overlook. Oh, I'm a generous person, but are you generous with forgiveness and mercy? When somebody deserves your wrath, are you generous with withholding it? That's what God is. He's generous with withholding wrath. And then the third way that I think that this can apply to us is that God gives not for our own comfort. And this is hard because God will give us a blessing and we'll instantly think of, wow, I just needed this so much. But God doesn't give us for our own comfort. He gives so that we can give. I just really want to be in debt. Why? Why do you want to be out of debt? What is the end game? I just really want God to move in this. Why? What is the end game? And I've found in my own life, and I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to me on this, that an inability for me to be generous is from my own lack of trust in God to provide. When I am incapable of being generous, it is from my own lack of trust in God. I'm concerned about tomorrow, not a current reality. But you can be a blessing, and God can do much through you. One final thing before we kind of go to prayer that I want to mention is be wise with your generosity. Sometimes people just don't even know where to draw the line, and they go to the other extreme in being overly generous. And so I do have to kind of give a little side note here. Some people, for instance, some think it's okay to take out loans in order to give. Not a good idea. Definitely not a good idea. Some people aren't really good with their finances, and they give so much so they don't even have money for rent. Once again, not a good idea. So if you look at your history, and you have a history of being overly generous, then you might need to cool it down. If you have a history of being kind of stingy, then you might need to amp it up. So that's a good kind of rule of thumb for me. As we close, kids, hope you're paying attention. It shan't be repeated. Do what you can with what you have. Just kidding, here it comes repeated. Do what you can with what you have. I said it twice. Especially kids. I mean, you don't have a whole lot of money, but listen, you can do what you can with what you have. Lord, I just pray you take our resources. We dedicate them to you, Lord. Not just money, although you can have that however you wish, Lord. Use our time, use our health, use our resources, our blessings. Use it in whatever way you see fit, God, to be a blessing to somebody else. We oftentimes don't understand just how much you're doing and how much you're working through us. But we do know that we don't have to know, because you are the God who sees what's going on. You hear, and you meet people in their need. So, Lord, I pray for those who are in need, that you would help us to be generous and beyond money, Lord. You'd help us to be generous in and of ourselves, like Abraham, that we would drop it for the sake of reaching somebody else, that we would take the loss for the sake of somebody else.